Welcome to This Week in Virginia, and a very special welcome to Liz White, Executive Director of One Virginia 2021. You've been with the organization almost since it started way back in 2013. You've been there since 2015, heading up different programs and outreach and having people at the polls, informing people what a creative approach to use, and now the Executive Director. And we really want to have an opportunity to talk with you just a little bit about the past. Tell us a little bit about the history of One Virginia 2021. Then we want to jump right into what's happening today in September and what lies ahead. So instead of my telling the story, the Lee Middleditch story, okay, I'm starting to tell it, but I'll be quiet and you tell the story about the founding of this rather unique organization.
Sure. So Lee Middleditch is the star of the story. So I don't think you've spoiled anything. In 2012, 2013, a group of prominent Virginians, including Lee Middleditch, came together and realized that anything much bigger than any partisan differences they might have, because they were from across the political spectrum, much more important than that was ending political gerrymandering in Virginia. They realized that nothing was going to get done, that we were just going to continue to get into polarization and partisan gridlock, and people were going to continue to feel left out of the system and disenfranchised and disillusioned if we couldn't stop partisan gerrymandering in its tracks. So they formed One Virginia 2021, and this was everyone from former Republican Lieutenant Governor Bill Bolling to current, at the time, Delegate Shannon Valentine, a Democrat from Lynchburg, Terry Cooper, who was one of the founders of the statewide Tea Party. So really across the ideological spectrum, as I said, and they put together One Virginia 2021. It is the first full-time effort in Virginia to end gerrymandering. And we started early in the decade and got told for several years, no one cares about this yet. We're not going to need to worry about this till 2021. But I think the most remarkable thing we've watched happen over the last decade is we went from having these early meetings where we were literally looking at research going, well, what word can we use other than gerrymandering? Because no one knows what that is. No one cares. That doesn't get anybody excited or passionate. To just a few years later, having a statewide network of volunteers and tens of thousands of people on our mailing list and looking for ways to help and reaching out to their representatives and saying enough is enough. And that education about not only what gerrymandering meant, but why it mattered and how secretive and exclusive the process was in Virginia at the time really got people worked up in a way that we never anticipated back in 2015.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask you about how you came to work with there, because you're William and Mary graduate, but I think maybe more in the drama area rather than political science, and maybe because redistricting is a drama. But
there's plenty of drama in politics. I think it's a theater major is not a bad way to go, it turns out. I was a performer and worked with children's theater and worked with several companies in town, and then had my kids, and that became harder, had my son, and that became harder. And I started looking around for other opportunities. And I'd always been kind of a political hobbyist, just kind of a junkie on my own time, and talked to our former executive director, Brian Cannon, who was a friend of mine from college, and said, what are you working on? What are other people working on? What's cool around here? And he said, actually, I need you to meet some people. And I went and met some of the other people from One Virginia, and they were looking to expand the staff. And I came on board as the development director. So you're putting my theater degree to good use.
Well, I'll not go into my background, but it's similar. So I understand that completely. Well, it's September 23rd. That's the day we're having the conversation. There's been a redistricting commission meeting, a couple of them this week. So tell our viewers where is the commission right now in the process? What are they working on?
So we're in the fun part now. We have this 16-member commission. It's 8 citizens, 8 legislators. It's the first of its kind in the country. Virginia is the first state to pass meaningful redistricting reform through their state legislature. Every other state that's done this has had to go around their legislature, straight on the ballot, because they'd be a state that would have the option to get X number of signatures, and they get to go on the ballot, like California or Michigan. So we've got this hybrid. They were convened in January, and they, in most decades, would have been done with this job by spring. But because of COVID, the federal census data, the arrival of that was delayed by several months, by about 5-6 months. So everything the commission does in creating these new maps is contingent on that data. So they have spent, these extra months kind of figuring out how Virginia's commission works. They were brand new. They were only officially put in place on election day last November. So there was a real quick turnaround to get these people in place, and they've been getting up to speed. They've been educating themselves on redistricting itself and issues in Virginia, and starting to hear from the public as to what they want to see in these new maps. So the middle of August, we really turned a corner into this next phase. And August 12th was when the US Census put out their data. The commission has, with the consensus of their lawyers, agreed that August 26th is the day they actually received it. It's uploaded into their software. They've put in place all of the data having to do with undoing prison gerrymandering, which Virginia outlawed last year. And so incarcerated people are counted at their last home address and not in the district where they're being incarcerated. So they had to undo all of that. It was a big process, but August 26th is the date to know, because that kicked off their 45-day clock that they have to draw House of Delegates and state Senate districts. So we are, well into that 45 days. The due date for those maps to go to the General Assembly is October 11th. The General Assembly then gives them an up or down vote. And we can get into other eventualities in a little bit. But currently, just last week, oh my gosh, it's all blending together. They've started to see some preliminary maps. They have made the decision to hire 2 sets of mapping consultants. One is traditionally works with Democrats, one traditionally works with Republicans. And they have each drawn a first draft of statewide maps for House of Delegates districts and state Senate districts. And now the commission is going through the process of figuring out what we like about one, what we like about another, where there's room to improve, and how we turn those 2 into one. And that is an interesting process that there's a lot of building as they fly, doing this for the first time. But that's the topic of discussion at the meetings happening right now.
Am I right in thinking that one of the unanimous votes, and maybe, I don't know how many unanimous votes they've had as they've taken them, but was a vote very recently to say that the addresses of incumbents would not be taken into consideration by either of the map drawers. Is that?
Yes. So the commission decided early on, and in fact, the General Assembly decided before the commission was even formed, that incumbent addresses could be allowed.
Right.
So the commission reaffirmed that they could be used somewhere in the process, but they did make the decision. I think that in a really overwhelming vote to. It was a unanimous vote. You are correct. I'm trying to keep them all straight.
Right.
A unanimous vote to say that the map drawers in their preliminary drafts, these first drafts, did not acknowledge incumbent addresses and did not take into account any political data, any former election results. So now we're getting to the point where the law requires that we make sure the statewide maps end up being politically neutral, that they kind of match Virginia's voting patterns. So that's not a 50-50 map per se, but that it isn't drastically removed from the voting patterns over the past several elections. So they will need to introduce them in these kind of future stages, these next stages. But I think it's incredibly important that the first drafts of these maps started without that information, that we didn't base these new districts on where current office holders live, the other significant vote that they took. And this was, I think, in direct response to public interest and public comment, is that they decided not to use the existing maps as a starting point. They decided they were going to scrap those and start completely from a blank page. So I think between those two considerations, Virginians and the public is really getting a fresh start on these maps and not remnants and just adjustments to maps that are not only 10 years old, but several of them were amended by courts, and all of them were drawn exclusively by the General Assembly.
I thought it was a very timely action by the state Supreme Court to rule on a matter before them with regards to where prisoners are housed. Can you comment on what the issue was there?
Sure. So several states, I think there's about a dozen states across the country, have recently, and Virginia is one of them, have recently outlawed what they call prison gerrymandering. The old way was to count incarcerated people in the district where the jail or prison is. So that artificially inflates the influence of the other voters, because incarcerated people aren't allowed to vote while they're in jail or prison. So, if you have 100 people in a district, which is very, very small, but if you had 100 people in a district, for easy math, and 25 of them were in prison, they still get the same voting power as a district where 100 people get to vote. So those 75 people get an outsized influence. Meanwhile, other districts have been kind of robbed of some of their influence because they've lost the count of these people who are incarcerated. That probably wasn't that simple an answer. So we've undone that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Virginia's undone that. And now incarcerated people are counted at their last known address. And that is especially impactful in rural districts, because that's generally where jails and prisons are. Many of them are out in Southwest Virginia or in Southside. And so that was the basis of the lawsuit, was that one, I think it was brought about because those districts are already in an area losing population according to the census data. And now they're losing even more population when you take out the prisoner numbers. Kind of the thesis of the lawsuit was that they couldn't, that law was illegal because it was passed in conjunction with the commission creation. The commission is who gets to create the rules on redistricting, and they hadn't been formed yet. You probably want to double check this with a lawyer, because again, theater degree. But the Supreme Court, the Virginia Supreme Court this morning unanimously dismissed the lawsuit and said that it did not have merit.
So would I be right in assuming that the map drawers, the two sets of maps that were drawn in accordance with what the General Assembly had acted on, and now what the Supreme Court has upheld?
Yeah. So part of the delay between census data release and their getting started was incorporating these numbers from the Department of Correction and adjusting the population in any of the affected districts. I know VPAP, the Virginia Public Access Project, has a really helpful set of graphics on that. They probably explain it much more simply than I do, but I'd recommend checking them out.
Thanks. We will put their address up, as well as the address of 1 Virginia 21, so that people can go to both places to get information. Okay, now, October 11. What can you sum up in a way what's remaining to be done between September 23rd and October 11? So
a lot, probably a scary amount. So they have to the commissioners have to figure out how to turn two statewide draft maps into one. In that process, they also have to consider public input. They have to consider communities of interest, which they will largely learn about through that public input. They also have to consider some Voting Rights Act provisions and make sure that there are what they deem to be an appropriate number of majority minority districts and voter opportunity districts, and make sure that the overall representation that will result from these maps is reflective of the increase in minority populations that the census data has indicated Virginia has had in the last decade. So there's a lot of factors that have to go into those maps. And they also, October 4th through 7th, they are going to have 2 public hearings a day, all virtual. They are at 10 o'clock and 4 p.m., 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. each of those days, Monday through Thursday. And they will be focused on regions, but I would encourage people to just go to the one that you're available to go to. They are accepting public comments on the draft maps or on communities of interest that they would like to be considered. And then they have to incorporate all of that. They're meeting again on the morning of the 11th to finalize their draft for the General Assembly, to take a final vote. Maps can only get voted out of the commission with a supermajority of each block, legislators and citizens. So you need 6 out of the 8 citizens to vote for them. You need 6 out of the 8 legislators to vote for them. And then the only other caveat there is that, for example, if they are House of Delegates maps being discussed, those 2 no votes can't be either the House Democrats or the House Republicans. Each caucus, in essence, gets a veto, because historically there have been some interchamber shenanigans. And this is kind of to make sure that everybody is taken care of and to eliminate those backroom deals that we've seen in Virginia's redistricting past.
Well, it's a great deal for them to unpack and to pack back up and to get ready into a package to go to the General Assembly. And we'll make sure that we get some addresses, whether the LIS calendar or others, so that people can follow and know. I'm sure they'll be on your website and other places. They'll be able to know when those public hearings are. Okay, then take us beyond. Let's be optimistic and say a map is agreed upon and it's going to the General Assembly sometime before midnight on October 11th. May be a long day or may not be. Then does the General Assembly when do they come back? Is there anything decided about that?
So they have to convene a special session. There haven't been any dates announced on that, but they all know it's coming. They have 15 days from the time they receive the proposed maps to just give an up or down vote. In the past, the redistricting maps came through like a regular bill. So you could have floor amendments and substitutions, and you could amend it and it could look nothing like it used to by the time it gets out of there. That is not the case here. They get an up or down vote, and they can make floor speeches and they can give suggestions and they can say, I don't like it and here's why. But they can't amend it. So they get an up or down vote in 15 days. If it's a no vote, and that's a simple majority vote, if it's a no vote, the commission gets another crack at this. They get 2 more weeks. They get 14 more days to produce a new map, probably incorporating some of that feedback, send it to the General Assembly again. They have 7 days this time to vote again. If at the end of that time, the General Assembly does not accept what the commission has put forth, the Supreme Court of Virginia will get involved. They hire 2 what are called special masters, who are, it's the coolest job title, but they are professional map makers. Virginia has used them before in the 2015 congressional racial gerrymandering case and also the 2018 House of Delegates racial gerrymandering case. They're basically unbiased, independent map drawers who come in and create the maps and kind of say, here you go. The other way it ends up at the Supreme Court of Virginia is if the commission can't pass anything, if they can't hit that vote threshold of 6 out of 8, it also would go to the Supreme Court.
So in that case, it really bypasses the General Assembly. If the only way it goes to the General Assembly is the commission sends it to the General
Yes.
Assembly. Now, to clarify for our viewers, when you say just a simple majority vote, that would be, I guess, a simple majority in each chamber.
Yes. Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at least 51 delegates, at least 21 senators.
I was running through those dates in my head and wishing I had a calendar we could pause and I could look at it. But I'll tell you, the 15 days, if they use that much time, that gets them almost toward the end of October, and there's something happening on November 2nd that the House of Delegates is very interested in, at least 91 of them who are running again. And so and then the 7-day window too. So I guess I would hope for their sake, particularly those who are on the ballot, that they wouldn't use the 15 days. They would come very soon to do that, because then the 7-day window, you do the 15, then you add the 7. Gosh, that's almost election day.
And the 14 in between.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Certainly this delay, moving this whole clock back 6 months and into fall and into early voting and into get out the vote time. I certainly can't speak for what's in the minds of the legislators, but the commissioners, both legislator and citizen commissioners, have indicated that they will operate with the goal in mind of wrapping this up before Election Day. So it's also, if you vote after Election Day, you get into having lame duck legislators voting on legislative maps, which is, legal, but not ideal. Yeah, so I know they're trying to wrap up soon. So hopefully that special session will not be a full 15 days.
So then when that's done, and let's say it's done and it's not going to a special masters, that's done, then the commission still has congressional districts to work on?
They do. And in fact, it's all going to be happening kind of concurrently, because the commission has just 15 extra days. They have a total of 60 days to do congressional districts. So they will wrap up their proposal for the General Assembly districts. And then while those are over at the General Assembly being considered, they have another public hearing on the 22nd, I believe, but they will be on our website. And they've got several more meetings to kind of start the process afresh and draw the 11 congressional districts. And then the same process happens. They send them over to the General Assembly. They get 2 cycles. If they deadlock at either point, the court gets them.
And Liz, thank you for all this information that you're getting. Do they have to do the congressional maps before December 31st or by December 31st? Does it have to be done in this calendar year?
No.
Can it roll into 2022?
The only way it would roll into the next calendar year is if it's at the courts by then. And the court doesn't have a deadline. So again, I'm sure that everyone has a vested interest in getting this done in an efficient and timely way. The only eventuality, I think, where it goes into 22 at all is if the courts have it and they are slowed down by the holiday schedule or whatever and end up having to take a little extra time into January. But that calendar, all those deadlines and windows we talked about, I think still get the congressional maps in before 2021 is over. Otherwise, we have to rename our organization.
Right, that's right. It would be the 2022. Now, are you really encouraging, is your organization really encouraging people to, if they haven't weighed in, or even if they have, to really get involved in these public hearings that are coming up? It's the one time for the public to have a chance to, the last time, I should say, for the public to have a chance to have a direct impact.
Yeah, we are absolutely encouraging people. We've been encouraging people to get involved every step of the process, starting with encouraging people to apply to be on the commission. And that was a whirlwind application process at the end of 2020. This new process, one of the incredibly unique things about it is all of the space for public voice and public input. even in, who applies. All the meetings are incredibly transparent. There's been opportunity for public comment at each of them. There's already been one round of public hearings back in July and August. Some of those were in person, but they had 8 regional hearings to hear what people wanted to see in upcoming maps and what they felt their community needed from the new maps. And those were not, they were certainly not as well attended as we would have liked to see. The commission now has a communications firm they're working with who hopefully will be able to get the word out a little bit. But One Virginia, the League of Women Voters, and several statewide groups who are also working on this have been and are ramping up efforts to not only tell people that it's happening, but also explain the importance of getting involved and try to provide tools to do so. We have a lot of those on our website, training sessions and tools for drawing a community of interest. You can kind of go in, you don't have to draw a whole district, but you say, oh, that's my neighborhood. It goes up to that street, it goes over to that church, it goes down to that school. And that's a great tool to help explain to the commission what this unit is that you'd like them to not draw a line through the middle of. So our whole goal has been to fill that space that's been created and help Virginia's public fill that space with voices, especially those who've been historically ignored in the process.
Well, 2/3 at least of the voters in the Commonwealth in the November 2020 election said, this is what we want to happen. And now it is happening.
It is happening.
And it's the next month is going to be very exciting to see what occurs. Any closing remarks you would want to make, Liz? We just really appreciate your being on This Week in Virginia.
Sure.
Anything you'd like to add?
Thank you so much for having me. I think any way to get this information out, to get the word out, is incredibly important. I think what's very exciting now is that every version of these proposed maps created by the consultants, amended by the commission, and anything submitted by members of the public are open for public comment. There is a site that we'll make sure everybody has. And in fact, we have a site, onevirginia2021foundation.org/maps. You can see the most recent proposed maps. And there's a link to the commission's page where you can leave comment directly on that map. So if you look at a House of Delegates plan and you zoom in on your neighborhood and go, why is it there? You can just, write, it's like a little Post-it note that pops up and say, this is where it should be. This is what I don't like. Or you might look and go, ooh, that's a lot better than it was, and leave them something that says, this looks great. Lock that in, don't move it. They are actively soliciting comment both on what you like and what you don't like. They seem to be incredibly mindful that there are only 16 of them. They can't know every corner of the Commonwealth, and the people who live in these communities know what's good for the communities better than just a room full of 16 people. So it's really important to be heard. If you don't want to testify at a public hearing, you can write them an email. You can leave one of these map comments. You can draw a map. You can write something and we'll read it at a public hearing. There's a lot of different options and a lot of different methods for feedback, but I'd encourage people to use any and all of them.
Liz White, Executive Director of One Virginia 2021. Thank you for being on This Week in Virginia. And Virginians, it's time, if you haven't done it, to really get involved in this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.